that feared God and turned away from evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. And the next few verses describe his great wealth, so that he was the greatest of all the children of the East in verse 3. And it talks about when his children would be feasting, that he would offer sacrifices at the end of verse 5, because he would be concerned, it may be that my sons have sinned and renounced God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. Verse 6, now it came to pass on the day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Jehovah, that Satan, the word there means the adversary. And as we read this, keep in mind the description of Satan in Revelation chapter 12. He is the accuser of the brethren. That Satan comes and also presents himself. And Jehovah said unto Satan, whence comest thou? And Satan answered Jehovah and said, from going to and fro in the earth, from walking up and down in it. And Jehovah said unto Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that fears God and turns away from evil. Then Satan answered Jehovah and said, does Job fear God for nothing? Have not you made a hedge about him and about his house and about all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands. And we didn't read the verses that describe the extent of his wealth, but it was extreme. He had tremendous flocks and herds. Satan says, but put forth thy hand now and touch all that he has, and he will renounce you to your face. And Jehovah said unto Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only upon himself put not forth your hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of Jehovah. And it fell on a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the eldest brother's house, that there came a messenger unto Job, saying, the oxen were plowing, the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, and they have slain thy servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another and said, the fire of God has fallen from heaven, and has burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While I was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans made 3 bands, fell upon the camels, and have taken them away, yea, and have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped to tell thee. While I was yet speaking, there came also another and said, thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house, and behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, smote the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. Just like that, everything he had was gone. His wealth, his servants, his children. And the poem continues, and we don't get the poetic effect of the meter because we're in English instead of Hebrew, but as it goes, Job arose and rent his robe and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped and said, naked I came out of my mother's womb, naked shall I return thither. Jehovah gave, and Jehovah has taken away. Blessed be the name of Jehovah. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. Again it came to pass on the day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Jehovah, that Satan came also among them, present himself before Jehovah. And Jehovah said unto Satan, from whence comest thou? And Satan answered Jehovah and said, from going to and fro on the earth, from walking up and down in it. And Jehovah said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? For there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and turneth away from evil, and he still holds fast his integrity, although thou moved me against him to destroy him without cause. And Satan answered unto Jehovah and said, skin for skin, yea, all that a man has he will give for his life. But put forth thy hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will renounce thee to thy face. And Jehovah said unto Satan, behold, he is in thy hand, only spare his life. So Satan went forth from the presence of Jehovah, and smote Job with sore boils, from the sole of his feet unto his crown. I always thought, even the soles of his feet. If you've ever had a boil, the pain is, I had one on my elbow when I was in college. And you can't let it touch anything. I didn't realize how many times during the night I would bang the wall with my elbow, because normally it didn't matter. You don't want anything touching it. And Job is covered with boils all the way down to, if the soles of his feet had been left, at least he could have stood there like this. He sits in ashes trying to relieve his pain, scraping himself with potsherd. Verse 8, and his wife said to him, do you still hold fast to your integrity? Renounce God and die. But he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women speaks. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came every one from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. And they made an appointment to come to bemoan him and to comfort him. And when they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him, they lifted up their voice and wept, and rent every one his robe, and sprinkled dust upon their heads toward heaven. And they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights. None spake a word unto him. They saw that his grief was very great. And now begins the dialogue of the book. Job is going to give a speech, and his comforters are going to respond to him, and he's going to respond, and they're going to go back and forth, and you'll see the effect that it creates. We'll hit some highlights. In James, the New Testament says, you have heard of the patience of Job. My Bible has a footnote there that said you have heard of the endurance of Job. And really that's a little bit better description when you look at Job. Job so far is incredibly patient. Job's not going to be able to keep up that level of patience as we go on. Chapter 3, verse 1. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed his day. And Job answered and said, let the day perish. Now, picture where he is, sitting on the ash heaps. Here's his 3 friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, standing there looking at him. They've all just been there quiet for all this time. And then finally he speaks, and this is his message. Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night which said, there's a man-child conceived, let that day be darkness. Let not God from above seek it, neither let light shine upon it. Verse 11, why didn't I die from the womb? Why did I not give up the ghost when my mother bare me? Verse 20, wherefore is light given to him that is in misery, and life unto the bitter in soul, who longs for death, but it comes not, and dig for it more than hid treasures, who rejoice exceedingly and are glad when they can find the grave. Verse 25, the thing which I fear comes upon me, and that which I am afraid of comes upon me. I am not at ease, neither am I quiet, neither have I rest. Trouble cometh. Then Eliphaz the Temanite said, and this is the first reply from any of his friends. They haven't said anything to him yet. And then Eliphaz says, chapter 4, verse 2, if one essay to commune with thee, wilt thou be grieved? But who can withhold himself from speaking? Behold, you have instructed many, and you have strengthened the weak hands. Thy words have upholden him that was falling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. But now it is come unto thee, and thou faintest. It toucheth thee, and thou art troubled. Is not thy fear of God thy confidence, and the integrity of thy ways thy hope? Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished being innocent, or where were the upright cut off? According as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. Well, you can see the presumption of Eliphaz. It's going to be the presumption of his friends. And it's what? you've got to be an evil person. You have done something. Bad things don't happen to good people. You've sinned. You need to repent. And not just you've sinned in the sense that all men have sinned. No, there's some, and as the book goes on, you're going to see the accusations about the sins that Job must have done and the hypocrisy that he must be living in. He continues, and he advises Job in chapter 5, as for me, I would seek unto God, and unto God would I commit my cause. Verse 17, behold, happy is the man whom God correcteth. Therefore despise thou not the chastening of the Almighty. Now these are good words, except the fact is, when all of this occurred, Job was living as he ought to have lived. That's not to say he had never sinned, but he was he was a righteous man. God had said he was the most righteous man on earth. And he was living as he ought to live. And yet his friends, now what you need to do, Job, is you need to repent. Chapter 6, Job answered and said, oh, that my vexation were but weighed, and my calamity laid in the balances. For now it would be heavier than the sands of the seas. Therefore my words have been harsh. Verse 6, can that which has no savor be eaten without salt? Verse 8, oh, that I might have my request, and that God would grant me the thing that I long for, even that it would please God to crush me. He just wants to be dead. Everything about his life, externally, is miserable. And he would like now to be dead. Verse 14, he says to his friends, to him that is ready to faint, kindness should be shown from his friend. But verse 15, my brethren have dealt deceitfully as a brook. Verse 21, now ye are nothing, ye see a terror and are afraid. Did I say, give unto me, or offer a present for me of your substance, or deliver me from the adversary's hand, or redeem me from the hand of the oppressors? Here he is in misery. He's going through all this pain. His three friends show up, and all they can say is, well, Job, you know, this wouldn't be happening if you were really being good. And of course, these fellas don't have boils all over their body. These fellas haven't lost everything they've got, so we're okay, you're not. What an awful message to somebody in misery. And so Job's saying, did I ask you guys for any help? Teach me, and I will hold my peace, and cause me to understand wherein I have erred. How forcible are your words of uprightness, but your reproof, what does it reprove? Do you think to reprove words, seeing that the speeches of one that is desperate are as the wind? Now, therefore, verse 28, be pleased to look upon me, for surely I shall not lie to your face. Return, I pray you, let there be no injustice. Yet return again, my cause is righteous. Is there injustice in my tongue? Cannot my taste discern mischievous things? Chapter 7, verse 11, at the end of the verse. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Chapter 8, Bildad now gives his first speech. Then answered Bildad the Shuhite and said, and there's no pity here. The guy's lost everything. He's in pain and in suffering. He sat there for a week without complaining. Then he finally starts complaining and letting people know how miserable he is, and all they can do is poke him. And now Bildad says, how long wilt thou speak these things? And how long shall the words of thy mouth be like a mighty wind? Does God pervert justice? Verse 4, if thy children have sinned against him, and he has delivered them into the hand of thy transgressors? If you were to seek diligently unto God and make supplication to the Almighty, if you were pure and upright, surely now he would awake for thee. And he refers in verse 13 to the paths of all that forget God. And he says at the end that when a man is righteous, God will fill the mouth with laughter and the lips with singing. And they that hate thee shall be clothed with shame, and the tent of the wicked shall be no more. Stop being a wicked man, Job. Be a good man. Job says in chapter 9, Job's third speech, Job answered and said, of a truth, I know that it is so, but how can man be just with God? If he is pleased to contend with him, he cannot answer him one of 1,000. Verse 11, lo, he goeth by me, and I see him not. He passeth on also, but I perceive him not. He continues in verse 21, last part of verse 21, chapter 9, verse 21. I despise my life, it is all one. Therefore I say, he destroys the perfect and the wicked. At the end of verse 24, if it be not he, who then is it? Verse 32, listen to this and think of who would later come, who would be both God and man. Our high priest, Jesus Christ. Listen, think about that as you hear verse 32. He is not a man as I am, that I should answer him, that we should come together in judgment. There is no umpire betwixt us, that he may lay his hand upon us both. He's saying there's nobody between us. He's not a man. He's God and I'm a man. There's nobody in between. Jesus answers that role nicely in the New Testament. Chapter 10, verse 1, my soul is weary of my life. I will give free course to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say unto God, do not condemn me. Show me where you contend with me. Is it good unto thee that thou should oppress, that thou shouldest despise the work of thy hands? Chapter 11, Zophar now answers. This is Zophar's first speech. Then answered Zophar the Naamathite and said, should not the multitude of words be answered? And should a man full of talk be justified? He says in verse 3, should thy boastings make men hold their peace? When thou mockest, shall no man make thee ashamed? For thou sayest, my doctrine is pure, and I am clean in thine eyes. Oh, that God would speak and open his lips against thee, and he would show thee the secrets of wisdom, for he is manifold in understanding. Know therefore that God exacts of thee less than thy iniquity deserves. So here you've got these four men, and we know Job was the best of these four men. And now when all this calamity comes upon him, these three guys are standing there saying, oh, you're not getting a fraction of what you really deserve. Verse 13, if you set thy heart aright, if you set your heart aright and stretch out your hands toward him, if iniquity be in thy hand, put it far away, and let not unrighteousness dwell in thy tents. Job responds with his fourth speech, chapter 12, verse 1. Then Job answered and said, no doubt, but ye are the people, and wisdom will die with you. He's being sarcastic. In other words, you guys know it all. When you die, just wisdom's gone from the earth. But I have understanding as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Yea, who knoweth not such thing as these? Chapter 13, verse 2. What you know, the same do I know also. I am not inferior to you. Surely I would speak to the Almighty. I desire to reason with God. But you are forgers of lies. You are all physicians of no value. Oh, that you would altogether hold your peace. Will you speak unrighteously for God? Now look at verse 10. At the end of the book, you'll see verse 10 come true. Job says in verse 10, he will surely reprove you. Verse 12, your memorable sayings are the proverbs of ashes, your defenses are the defenses of clay. Hold your peace, let me alone that I may speak, and let come on me what will. Verse 15, behold, he will slay me, I have no hope. Nevertheless, I will maintain my ways before him. At the end of verse 18, I know that I am righteous, but who is he that will contend with me? For then I would hold my peace and give up the ghost. Verse 23, how many are my iniquities and my sins? Make me to know my transgression and my sin. He talks about inheriting the iniquities of his youth at the end of verse 26, and he ends in verse 28 this chapter saying, I am like a rotten thing that consumes, like a garment that is moth-eaten. 14:1, man that is born of woman is of few days and full of trouble. Then he starts talking about death and the idea of resurrection, and realize that in the Old Testament very little is said about the afterlife. This is one of the passages that addresses it. And Job says in verse 7, when a tree, if it's cut down, it may sprout again. Verse 10, but man dies and is laid low. Yea, man gives up the ghost, and where is he? Verse 12, so man lieth down and riseth not till the heavens be no more. They shall not awake, nor be roused out of their sleep. And you could look at that, and till the heavens end, they won't be roused. Or you could look at it as, when the heavens end, they will be roused. Verse 13, oh, that thou wouldest hide me in Sheol, that thou wouldest keep me secret until thy wrath is past, that thou wouldest appoint for me a set time and remember me. If a man die, shall he live again? All the days of my warfare would I wait till my release would come. Thou wouldest call, and I would answer thee. 15, Eliphaz now speaks his second speech. Then answered Eliphaz, and he said in verse 2, should a wise man make answer with vain knowledge? Into verse 3, should he make speeches wherewith he can do no good? Eliphaz tells Job, you have done away with fear. You hinder devotion before God. For your iniquity teacheth thy mouth, and you choose the tongue of the crafty. Your own mouth condemns thee, and not I. Yea, your own lips testify against thee. Verse 9, what do you know that we know not? What understandest thou which is not in us? With us are both the gray-headed and the very aged men, much elder than thy father. And they go on and continue to rebuke him. And he says in verse 20, the wicked man travaileth with pain all his days. Job responds with his fifth speech, verse 1 of chapter 16. Job answered and said, I have heard many such things. Miserable comforters are ye all. You remember, that's what they had come for. They had come to, here came his friends to comfort him. And Job well says, miserable comforters are ye all. Verse 4, I could speak as you do, if your soul were in my soul's stead. He's going to turn this around if tables were turned. I could speak as you do, if your soul were in my soul's stead. I could join words together against you and shake my head at you, but I would strengthen you with my mouth, and the solace of my lips would assuage your grief. Chapter 18, Bildad, his second speech. And he reminds Job in verse 5, the light of the wicked will be put out. Verse 11, terrors shall make him, remember who? The wicked. Terrors shall make him afraid on every side, and shall chase him at his heels. His strength shall be hunger bitten. Calamity shall be ready at his side. The members of his body shall be devoured. Now remember, Job has lost all his children and everything, and then Bildad says in verse 18, he shall have, talking about the wicked, he shall have neither son nor son's son among his people, nor any remaining where he sojourned. They that come after shall be astonished at his day, as they were as they that went before were affrighted. Surely such are the dwellings of the unrighteous, and this is the place of him that knows not God. Chapter 19, Job asks a question. Verse 2, how long will you vex my soul and break me in pieces with words? These 10 times have you reproached me. You are not ashamed that you deal hardly with me. And be it indeed that I have erred, my error remaineth with myself. Verse 13, second part. Mine acquaintances are wholly estranged from me. Verse 18, even young children despise me. If I arise, they speak against me. All my familiar friends abhor me, and they whom I loved are turned against me. Verse 21, have pity upon me. Have pity upon ye, O ye, my friends. Verse 23, this is great. Oh, that my words were now written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book, that with an iron pen and lead they were engraven in the rock forever. But as for me, now look, as much pain as he's in, as much misery as he's in, look at his trust in God. But as for me, I know that my Redeemer liveth, and at last he will stand upon the earth. After my skin, even this body is destroyed, then without my flesh shall I see God, whom even I shall see on my side. Chapter 20, Zophar now gives his second speech. He says in verse 4, Knowest thou not this of old time, since man was placed upon the earth, the triumphing of the wicked is short. Verse 7, Yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. Verse 27, The heavens shall reveal his iniquity, and the earth shall rise up against him. The increase of his house shall depart. His goods shall flow away. And of course, what had happened to all his goods? They'd flown away. Verse 29, This is the portion of a wicked man from God, in the heritage appointed unto him by God. Chapter 21, Job's seventh speech. Job answered and said, Hear diligently my speech. And now Job poses a philosophical question for them. Look at this. After saying in verse 4 at the end, Why should I not be impatient? Mark me and be astonished. Lay your hand upon your mouth. Even when I remember I am troubled, horror takes hold on my flesh. Now here's his question, starting in verse 7. Wherefore do the wicked live? Now what's their argument been all along? If you're a bad person, calamities come upon you. Your children die, your goods are taken away. If you're a bad person, all these bad things happen to you. If you're a good person, bad things don't happen to you. That's been their argument, right? So Job says in verse 7, Then why do the wicked live and become old and wax mighty in power? Their seed is established with them in their sight, their offspring before their eyes. Their houses are safe from fear, neither is the rod of God upon them. Their bulge gendereth, it faileth not. Their cow calveth, and casteth not her calf. They send forth their little ones like a flock, and their children dance. They sing to the timbrel and the harp, and rejoice at the sound of the pipe. They spend their days in prosperity, and in a moment they shall go down to Sheol. And they say unto God, Depart from us, for we desire not the knowledge of his ways. That's a pretty good question, isn't it? They've come to their friend who they knew was a good man, and because calamity has fallen upon him, they have assumed that he's done these evil, wicked sins, and so they've accused him so. And their whole argument is based on only good things happen to good people, and only bad things happen to bad people. That's their idea. So Job says, what about all those wicked people who are wealthy and living long? At the end of verse 21, at the end of chapter 21, he says, How then comfort me in vain, seeing that in your answers there remains only falsehood. Chapter 22, Eliphaz gives his third speech. And among other things, he's decided what sins Job has committed. Verse 5, Is not your wickedness great? Neither is there any end to your iniquities. You have taken pledges of your brother for nothing. You have stripped the naked of their clothing. You have not given water to the weary to drink. You have withheld bread from the hungry. And he says in verse 9, You have sent widows away empty, and the arms of the fatherless have been broken. Therefore snares are round about thee. Before, they didn't know what it was. Well, now Eliphaz, he knows what it was. You've been breaking the arms of orphans. You've been sending the widows away hungry, etc., etc. Job responds, chapter 23. Job answered and said at the end of verse 2, My stroke is heavier than my groaning. He says, you think I'm complaining a lot? My stroke is heavier than my groaning. And he goes, and listen, let's drop down to verse, he's pleading, wanting to communicate with God, but he finally says in verse 10, He knoweth the way that I take. Now listen, this is really good. When he has tried me, I shall come forth as gold. This is chapter 23, verse 10. My foot has held fast to his steps. His way I have kept and have not turned aside. I have not gone back from the commandments of his lips. I have treasured up the words of his mouth more than my necessary food. I've been doing his will. I've been following his word. He knows the way I take. When he has tried me, I will come forth as gold. But, verse 13, he is in one mind, and who can turn him? And what his soul desireth, even he doeth, for he performeth that which is appointed for me. Chapter 25, Bildad's third speech, and he says in verse 4, how then can man be just with God? How can he be the clean that's born of a woman? And he talks about it, the stars are not pure in his sight, how much less a man. Job says in chapter 26 to his friends, how have you helped him that is without power? How have you saved the arm that has no strength? How have you counseled him that has no wisdom, and plentifully declared sound knowledge? To whom have you uttered words? Continuing, chapter 27. Verse 1, Job again took up his parable, and he says at the end of verse 4, he says his tongue would not utter deceit. And he says in verse 5, far be it from me that I should justify you. Till I die, I will not put away mine integrity from me. My righteousness I hold fast, and will not let it go. He says down here in chapter 28, verse 23, God understands the way thereof, he knows the place thereof. Verse 28, unto man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, to depart from evil, that is understanding. And then Job starts fondly remembering his former life. And let's read this text, a little bit lengthy here in chapter 29. But it's just wistful. Verse 2, oh, that I were as in the months of old, as in the days when God watched over me, when his lamp shined upon my head, and by his light I walked through darkness, and I was in the ripeness of my days, and when the friendship of God was upon my tent, when the Almighty was yet with me, and my children were round about me, when my steps were washed with butter, and the rock poured me out streams of oil. When I went forth to the gate of the city, when I prepared my seat in the street, the young men saw me and hid themselves. The aged rose up and stood. The princes refrained their talking, laid their hand upon their mouth. The voice of the nobles was hushed. Their tongue cleaved to the roof of their mouth. When the ear heard me, then it blessed me. When the eye saw me, it gave witness unto me. Because I delivered the poor that cried, the fatherless also that had none to help him. The blessing of him that was ready to perish came upon me. I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. This is the kind of man that Job had been. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. My justice was as a robe and as a diadem. I was eyes of the blind, and feet was I to the lame. I was a father to the needy, and the cause of him that I knew not I searched out. I break the jaws of the unrighteous and pluck the prey out of his teeth. He says in verse 21, unto me men gave ear and waited and kept silence for my counsel. Because he had been such a righteous and good man, people had respected him. And they wanted to hear what he said. And when he spoke, people listened. Of course, now he's sitting here in the ashes, and his three friends won't listen to a word he says, won't even offer any pity. But now, chapter 30, verse 1, they that are younger than me have me in their derision. Verse 9, now I'm become their song, yea, I'm a byword unto them. They abhor me, and they stand aloof from me, and spare not to spit in my face. Life has changed a lot for Job. He describes his morals, chapter 31. He said, I made a covenant with mine eyes. How then should I look upon a virgin? He says in the next section is similar to, you remember when Paul is appealing to Caesar, he said, if I've done something worthy of death, then fine, kill me. But I didn't, so I appeal to Caesar. That's kind of like this section here in chapter 31. He says in verse 5, if I've walked with falsehood, this is chapter 21, verse 5, if I walk with falsehood. Verse 7, if my step has turned out of the way. Verse 9, if my heart was enticed to a woman. Verse 10, then let my wife grind to another, and let others bow down upon her. Verse 13, if I despise the cause of my manservant or my maidservant. Verse 14, what then shall I do when God rises up? Verse 16, if I withheld from the poor their desire. Verse 19, if I have seen any perish for want of clothing. Verse 21, if I lifted up my hand against the fatherless. 22, then let my shoulder fall from the shoulder blade, and mine arm be broken from the bone. Verse 24, if I made gold my hope, if I rejoiced because my wealth was great. Verse 26, if I beheld, etc., etc. If I did those things, he had the wealth. He said, if I made that my hope, then I would deserve all this. Then I would, let all this come upon me because I would deserve that. Verse 40, then let thistles grow instead of wheat and cockle instead of barley. The words of Job are ended. Chapter 32. So these three men ceased to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. And then there's another character comes into the story. Elihu. And he's younger. And he's worked up. Against Job was his wrath kindled because he justified himself rather than God. That's at the end of verse 2. Elihu has a problem with Job, and he's got a problem with the three friends also. And he says, now in verse 4, now Elihu had waited to speak unto Job because they were older than he. And when Elihu saw that there was no answer in the mouth of the three men, his wrath was kindled. And Elihu the son of Barachel the Buzite answered and said, I'm young, and you are very old. Wherefore I held back, and did not show you my opinion. I said, days should speak, and multitudes of years should teach wisdom. But there is a spirit in man, and the breath of the Almighty giveth them understanding. Is it not the great that are wise, nor the aged that understand justice? Therefore I said, hearken to me, and I will show you mine opinion. Behold, I waited for your words, I listened for your reasonings, whilst ye searched out what to say. Yea, I attended unto you, and behold, there was none that convinced Job, or answered his words among you. You guys have failed. But then he turns to Job in chapter 33 and says, howbeit, Job, I pray thee hear my speech. And remember what he's upset with Job about? Go back to the end of verse 2, chapter 32, verse 2. At the end of that verse it says, against Job was his wrath kindled because he justified himself rather than God. And that's a lot of what Job's been doing. And so now he goes through and he starts reminding Job of who God is. And talking about God's right, that he's greater than man, etc., etc. And then finally, and he gives some more rebukes. And he also talks to Job about God's grace. Verse 24 of chapter 33. Then God is gracious unto him and saith, deliver him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom. Which for us, has great meaning when we think of Christ. Verse 29, lo, all these things doth God work twice, yea, thrice with a man to bring his soul back from the pit, that he may be enlightened with the light of the living, etc., etc. Then he says some more things to the three friends, and he says of Job that Job spoke without knowledge and his words were without wisdom, and he'd multiplied words against God, etc., etc. He said to Job in chapter 35, 2, thinkest thou this to be thy right? Or do you say that your righteousness is more than God's? You've been talking about how righteous. Are you more righteous than God? He says to him. But he proceeds and he has his say. And then we get to the end of the book, chapter 38. Guess who speaks at the end of the book? God speaks. And almost as interesting as what God does say is what God doesn't say. God doesn't explain to Job the fact that he talked about that Job was the strong man. Job was the one in whom he found great favor. And that this challenge showed Satan that man could choose to do what was right. And man could stand up and obey, even under trying circumstances. Sometimes I think of Satan as, you remember when you were in school, if you failed a test, and you went home and you have to tell your parents that you failed a test, well, you might be in trouble. But if you can say everybody failed, then you're not in trouble, are you? It's obviously the teacher's fault. But if the kid across the street got 100 on the test because he was studying while you were playing baseball, then how do you feel about that kid? You don't like that. Well, Satan failed. Satan's evil. And you see him in Revelation, well, he's the accuser of the brethren. Look at him, look at him. And in Job, he's shown, the lesson is not that man can live life without sin and doesn't need the blood of Christ. But the lesson is shown that man can choose to do what's right. But all of this is not explained to Job. Instead, God just reminds Job, you're a man and I'm God. Listen to this, chapter 38. Then Jehovah answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now your loins like a man, for I will demand of you, and declare thou unto me. Okay, speaking to Job. Where were you? Were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if you have understanding. Who determined the measures thereof, if you know? Or who stretched the line upon it? Whereupon were the foundations thereof fastened? Who laid the cornerstone thereof, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Verse 8, who shut up the sea with doors when it brake forth, as if it had been issued out of the womb? When I made the clouds the garment thereof, and the thick darkness a swaddling band for it, and marked it out for my bound, and set the bars and doors, and said, hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed. Have you commanded the morning since the days began, and caused the day spring to know its place? Verse 16, have you entered into the springs of the sea? Have you walked in the recesses of the deep? Have the gates of death been revealed to you, or have you seen the gates of the shadow of death? Have you comprehended the earth and its breadth? Declare if you know it all. And he goes through and he asks Job just a number of things. He asks him about how the snow, and about the animals up in the mountains, and when they give birth, and just natural point after natural point of the physical universe. Do you know this? Did you create that? Did you do this? Do you know how that works? And when he doesn't explain why this has happened. He's just reminding Job of who he is and who Job is. And then finally, we get down in chapter 40. Verse 3, Job answered Jehovah and said, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer thee? I lay my hand upon my mouth. Once I have spoken, I will not answer, yea, twice, but it will proceed no further. Then Jehovah answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, gird up thy loins now like a man. I will demand of thee, and you declared unto me. Will you even annul my judgment? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Do you have an arm like God? Can you thunder with a voice like him? And he continues now, and he starts talking about these tremendous natural creatures that God had made and these different things. And then finally we get to the end of the book, chapter 42. Job answered Jehovah and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be restrained. Was holding this and a few others back like in the 70s and 80s, but now it's begun to be pretty popular. Although there's some other scientists that absolutely do not agree with it, that birds evolved from dinosaurs. And so one of the museums, now they've dressed up one of the dinosaurs in feathers. They have no basis for doing that from the skeletal remains, but they've just put that there. But if you go down to Smithsonian, you'll see not plaster makeups, but actual, either the bones themselves or more likely casts made from the bones, and you're standing there looking at the skeleton. Now, that thing lived. Now, if it lived, and if the Bible tells us who created animals, and when he created animals, then they lived at the same time as man. Is there any evidence for that? Well, yes, there is. And one of the places we will go for evidence of that is the book of Job. There's also down in the Paluxy River Valley, there have been some dinosaur footprints found with man footprints in the same layer of strata. Job chapter 40. This is in the section where God is reminding Job of his power. Job chapter 40, and he says in verse 15, behold now Behemoth. Now what is a behemoth? You might have a footnote in your Bible telling you what it is. And that's a guess. The translators are guessing what they think this behemoth might be. My footnote says it's the hippopotamus. Some people have suggested it's the elephant. It's a big animal, and we're going to read this description and you see what you think it might be. Behold now Behemoth, which I made as well as you. And as we read this, keep in mind that Job lived much earlier than most of the characters of the Old Testament. Behold now Behemoth, which I made as well as you. He eats grass like an ox, Behold now, his strength is in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together, his bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. Surely the mountains bring him food, and all the beasts of the field play there. Under the lotus plants he lies down, in the covert of the reeds in the marshes. The lotus plants cover him with shade, the willows of the brook surround him. If a river rages, he is not alarmed. He is confident, though the Jordan rushes to his mouth. Can anyone capture him when he is on watch? With barbs, can anyone pierce his nose? Now, does that sound like a hippopotamus? Well, he can eat stuff. If the water rises, does the hippopotamus worry about it? No, doesn't bother the hippopotamus at all. Is a hippopotamus a big animal? Yeah. If you are going to try to impress somebody, which Job is being meant to realize here the extreme power and might of God. If you were going to pick out an animal and say, I made that, this is one of my favorites, would you pick out the hippopotamus? I mean, nothing against the hippopotamus per se, some of my best friends are hippopotamuses, no. But, for God to say that, verse 19, he is the first of the ways of God. Hippopotamus is kind of impressive, but he's not that impressive compared to some of the other animals God created. And then there's another thing. I think I heard George, did you say it? He bends his tail like a cedar. You ever look at hippopotamus tail? After looking at that passage, I've paid careful attention to hippopotamus tails when I'm at the zoo. And if there's the hippopotamus, and there's a leg, and there's a leg, we're looking kind of at the back side here. A hippopotamus tail is kind of a ball of fat about like that. That just doesn't fit. He bends his tail like a cedar, does it? He doesn't even bend it like a bush. Now, what if we're talking about an animal with a tail like that? Would that maybe fit the verse? He bends his tail like a cedar? Yes, it would. Would that fit the idea? He is the first of the ways of God? Yes, it would. Well, and another thing there, a hippopotamus can be, people have been killed by hippopotamuses. If you get in water with an angry hippopotamus, you're in trouble. But all the same, they can overturn a canoe and stuff. But this sounds like a mightier animal than the hippopotamus. Now, chapter 41 describes an even stranger animal. Chapter 41, verse 1. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook? Now, what is a Leviathan? Well, my footnote says, or the crocodile. And it's not because they know this is the crocodile. They're guessing that it's the crocodile. And parts of it sound like a crocodile. Let me read you the parts. Well, let's just read through. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook, or press his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? All of these are rhetorical questions. Kind of like, can you pick up an elephant? That type of a question. Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak to you with soft words? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him for a servant forever? This is an animal that you cannot domesticate, obviously. Will you play with him as with a bird? Will you bind him for your maidens? Will the traders bargain over him? Will they divide him among the merchants? A lot of animals you can catch, you can train, you can chop up and sell. This is not one of those kind of animals. Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? And the answer to all these questions is obviously no. Now, this is a pretty magnificent animal that you can't fill him with harpoons or get spears into his head. It's a pretty fierce beast. Lay your hand on him, remember the battle, you will not do it again. Behold, your expectation is false. Will you be laid low even at the sight of him? No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. And then God's point is, I made this. If nobody will even deal with him, just remember, I made him. No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him. Who then is he that can stand before me? Who is given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. Then he comes back to Leviathan. I will not keep silence concerning his limbs, or his mighty strength, or his orderly frame. Who can strip off his outer armor? Who can come within his double mail? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth there is terror. That sounds like a crocodile. You know, the doors of his face, around his teeth is terror. That sounds like a crocodile. Of course, it could sound like anything that had, a big jaw with lots of teeth. His strong scales are his pride, shut up as with a tight seal. One is so near to the other that no air can come between them. Keep in mind he has scales. They are joined one to another, they clasp each other and cannot be separated. Now, look at verse 18. His sneezes flash forth light. His eyes are like the eyelids of the morning. Out of his mouth go burning torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils smoke goes forth, as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals. Well, now you say, that's a fire-breathing dragon. What's a fire-breathing dragon doing in the book of Job? Well, let's keep reading. A flame, and you might say, well, maybe it didn't really mean he's breathing fire. Well, just read the next part. A flame goes forth from his mouth. Sounds fire-breathing to me. In his neck lodges strength, and dismay leaps before him. The folds of his flesh are joined together, firm on him and immovable. His heart is hard as a stone, even as hard as a lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. Because of the crashing, they are bewildered. The sword that reaches him cannot avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He regards iron as straw, bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. Sling stones are turned into stubble. Clubs are regarded as stubble. He laughs at the rattling of the javelin. His underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreads out like a threshing sledge on the mire. He makes the deep depths boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a jar of ointment. Behind him he makes a wake to shine. One would think the deep to be gray-haired. Nothing on earth is like him. One made without fear. He looks on everything that is high. He's king over all the sons of pride. Is that a crocodile? That's not a crocodile. It's got scales, it's got a lot of teeth, and you don't want to grab a hold of it, but that's not all it is. He said, I won't keep silence concerning his limbs. Limbs are not the impressive part of a crocodile, is it? Or the strength in his neck. I imagine a crocodile's neck is pretty strong, but you usually don't think of the neck there because there's a body and there's a head. You don't think a lot about the neck. Dinosaurs had longer necks. Well, but it's fire breathing. What's this? And a lot of people say that this is a mythical animal. It's just, a reference here. It's a mythical animal. Well, the problem is, if this is God reminding Job of how powerful he is, what point would there be in referring to a mythical animal that he never made? Job, I want you to understand how powerful I am. Here's an animal I never made, and I made it. That wouldn't be much of a point, would it? Well, somebody might say, well, this just shows the Bible's not true. A fire-breathing dragon. And that's sure what it sounds like more than a crocodile. It said, when he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. A crocodile, he's on all fours. Now, he can stand up and run. They can run faster than you think. I once tried to catch an alligator, a small one, and when he jumped at me, I thought they were fast in the water, slow on the land. They got more energy than you think. But they still got to stay on all fours. They're down there. This is when he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. And you see people, trying to throw javelins and stuff. It just doesn't make any difference. Iron he regards as straw. Bronze is rotten wood. Because of the crashing, the people are bewildered. This, you can almost see it, coming through a village or a town, that kind of a thing. Is that a crocodile? That's not a crocodile. Well, what on earth are these creatures? Well, when we said fire-breathing dragon, I think that's pretty much what we got here. Well, but fire-breathing dragons didn't really exist. How do you know they didn't exist? I've got a book in my office. It's an evolutionary book. And it talks about the beliefs in dragons. And it says the reason people believed in dragons was because they found bones in Europe, like of the woolly rhinoceros, or giant bears or different things like from the Ice Ages. And they would find these bones, and it wasn't any of the animals they had in Europe at the time. And so they needed to explain these fossilized bones. And this is before paleoanthropology and everything, paleontologists. And so they, made up an animal to fit the bones. Well, that's what the evolutionist in the book says. But that doesn't fully solve the question. Let me show you why. Why would, for instance, let's take the woolly rhinoceros. Why would you necessarily get from a woolly rhinoceros bone a scaly, fire-breathing dragon type thing, among other dragons? Plus, where in the world geographically did they talk about dragons and fire-breathing dragons? In like England, tales, the knight rescuing the maiden from the dragon, fire-breathing dragon, all that stuff. Is that the only place? Where else did they talk about dragons? China. Now we've got something very curious. Way over here on this side of the world, the Chinese have these legends about big, scaly reptile animals breathing fire. And way over here in England, we got these tales of big, scaly reptile type animals breathing fire. That's a little bit heavy on coincidence, isn't it? You would think there ought to be some connection between there. And there might be some connections we don't know about. Maybe the tales of dragons in England were based on the description of the Leviathan in Job chapter 41. That could be, I don't know. Let's face it, the Romans were in Britain in the 1st century AD. They built a wall between Britain and Scotland in the time of Hadrian, just a little bit after the death of John the Apostle, a few years after that. 70-something miles long, huge wall, and they had that lower part of Britain. And the Bible is already written by then, and it circulates up. The Bible reached Britain in early days. So maybe, but the Bible was not a real prominent book in China. Where did these ideas, and I'm not saying that the English dragons came from the Bible. I'm just saying that when you start having in more than one place in the world, separate, cut off places in the world, the same type of tale, you know what it's time to do? It's time to start thinking, instead of all of them making it up, could it be that there was a big animal like this or something like this in their past that they remembered? And we do know dinosaurs existed. And according to the Bible, dinosaur, or all animals, and man were created the same week. So did men, according to the Bible, ever see dinosaurs? Yes. Now, if your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy saw a canary, do you think that would be passed down in family history? No. If your great-great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy saw a lizard, would that be passed down in family history? But what if he saw a great big reptile that could breathe fire? Would that be the type of thing that you would tell your kids about and they'd tell their kids? Yes, it would. Also, look at this. I'm going to give you a better, instead of saying that dragons are based on like woolly rhinoceros bones or something, I think they're based on dinosaurs. When you think about a dragon, you got up here, you got the head, and you got your teeth and everything, and then you got what? You got a neck, and then you've got a body, and then there might have some, arms kind of like this, kind of like Tyrannosaurus Rex type deals. And then you got your feet down here, and then you got your tail, maybe a thing like that at the end. Now, and then lots of times too, they'll put what on them? Yeah, they might have what feathered wings? Membrane wings. And then you got your fire coming out here. Now let me suggest to you that what this is not entirely fairy tale, that there's some basic biological realities that have been combined together here. We know that one type of animal that lived in ancient times, evolutionists say before man existed, some ancient sources, and I believe, according to the Bible, at the same time man existed, things like pterodactyls and pteranodons. What kind of wings did they have? They had membrane wings. Listen to this. Now, when you read ancient writers, you can find all sorts of things. You can find people believing in the phoenix bird and all kind of stuff. You have to be real careful with this. Yet, Herodotus and Aristotle are worth looking at and seeing what they said. 460 BC, the respected Greek explorer Herodotus described small flying reptiles in ancient Egypt and Arabia. These animals sound amazingly like Rhamphorhynchus, or whatever you call them. They had the same like snake body and bat-like wings. Many had been killed near a city of Buta, Arabia. He was shown a canyon with piles of backbones and ribs. Herodotus said these animals could sometimes be found in the spice groves. They were small in size and of various colors. Large numbers would sometimes gather in the frankincense trees. When workers wanted to gather the tree's valuable juices, they would usually use smelly smoke to drive the flying reptiles away. So he's talking about a small flying reptile. Do we have any flying reptiles in the world today? We don't have flying, we got bats, that's flying mammal. We don't have flying reptiles. He's talking about flying reptiles, 460 BC. Well, but scientists tell us that they've been dead for millions of years. Raise your hand if you know what the coelacanth is. How many of you know what the coelacanth is? I thought a lot of you would know about the coelacanth. The coelacanth is a fish. It's a really weird looking fish. It's kind of a big fish, and like maybe about so big. And his fins, they're kind of like appendages almost within the finny part on the end. But he's almost got like stalks, where another fish just has kind of a transparent membrane fin. He's got almost a stalk thing there. Coelacanths were supposed to have been dead for millions and millions and millions of years. One of those extinct animals that's been gone forever. And that's what the scientists thought until back around the 1920s or 30s. And guess what showed up at a fish market in Africa? A coelacanth. And there have been a number of coelacanth caught since. There, you can find them off the coast of Madagascar. I saw on I guess it was National Geographic, a special on the coelacanths where they went down and they filmed them. You know, and here these coelacanths are down on the bottom. According to the scientists, before they found the coelacanth, they thought that these had been dead for, of course they believe the earth is very, very old, for millions and millions and millions of years, and they were still alive, and people were catching them. If the scientists claimed that they'd been dead for all that time, and obviously they'd been alive all that time, could they be wrong on some of the other animals? How do we know from these same scientists that flying reptiles didn't exist in 460 BC? Herodotus said they did. Aristotle, well-respected Greek Aristotle, said that in his time it was common knowledge that creatures like this also existed in Ethiopia. Similar animals, 3 feet long, were also described in India by the geographer Strabo. Now, when I'm doing word studies and such, Herodotus is one of the ancient writers that's often mentioned and such. There's Herodotus, Aristotle, Strabo. If you've got 3 ancient notable people like that, all reporting flying reptiles, you know what that makes me start to think? That in that time, they still had flying reptiles. And I think that's where this flying reptile wing comes from. What about this? Well, for a minute, let's just forget about the fire part, and let's take off the part from some other things, and take the tail into a regular shaped tail. And you know what that pretty much looks like? What's that look like? That looks like a dinosaur. Now, if people were alive at the same time as dinosaurs, so that the Chinese, their ancestors, had seen great big reptiles, and the British, their dinosaurs, had seen great big reptiles, wouldn't that explain why they both had this idea? Now, the portrayals of dragons look different. In China, they're usually more of they're big, but more of a snake-like body. You know, legs up here and legs back there, but still kind of a snake-like body, you know, going like that. Whereas over here, they're more that. But the point is, there are reports of these animals, and here's what I can't get past. If this is based on woolly rhinoceros bones and stuff like that, why did they both go with reptile? Why did they both go with giant reptile? Another thing, there were a lot of animals that used to be bigger than they are today, or at least species of those animals that were bigger than they are today. I was reading an article this past week on armadillos, and there was one variety of armadillo that weighed 2,000 pounds. How many of you have been down to the Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C., Smithsonian, and seen the giant sloth skeletons? The giant sloths they have are this tall at the back. You know, they're like on all fours, and they're at least that tall at the back. That's a big sloth. They have found fossils of giant beavers, all kind of animals used to be big. I don't know if it's due to conditions being different before the flood or what. But it's just a fact that a lot of animals, the mammoth and the mastodon, I can't remember which, but one of those is a good bit bigger than the elephant. I mean, they're all kind of in the same thing, but it's kind of like you got your Asian elephant, your African elephant, and then you got your mammoth, you know. A lot of animals used to be bigger than they are today. Now, let me show you a few pictures. This there we go. This is an ancient Roman mosaic from the 2nd century AD, and it's showing a couple of animals. This is a Roman mosaic. Maybe they're just mythical animals. Maybe they're, you know, somebody just made it up out of the figment of their imagination. And that type of thing happens. And anecdotal evidence you have to be real careful with. That's why I said this is speculative. Because you can find anecdotal evidence. You know, a guy says, yeah, a little spaceship took me up, you know, and then you can find all kind of stuff. But let's just look at that as the evidence that it is. A mosaic was made in the 2nd century AD portraying that kind of animal. Now, a lot of the dinosaurs were aquatic dinosaurs. There were huge dinosaurs that spent not just walking around in the water, but they had flippers like plesiosaurs and such. They were giant dinosaurs that just had flippers and they swam around in the ocean. That looks kind of like a plesiosaur. The Loch Ness Monster. My guess is there's nothing in the Loch Ness. But if there is, you know what one of the ideas speculated about it is? That it could be a plesiosaur. That in those deep lochs, it has survived down through the generations. I don't think that's what it is, but if there's a big something in there, then that's probably the type of thing that it would be. Now look at this. This, I don't think it's what I'm going to suggest, but I'm just giving you some things to think about. This is from a mosaic in Pompeii. Any of you kids that like to read about dinosaurs, what's that look like right there? That looks like a Dimetrodon, doesn't it? Now, it may not be a Dimetrodon. The book, that's from a book on ancient Roman civilization, and it says that this is a hippopotamus and this is a crocodile. It may be. I mean, you know, sometimes if you look at the artwork that they did in Europe of some of the American animals, sometimes they got it pretty bad. Like there's one of beavers, and it's, I mean, these beavers are carrying around wood and stuff like this. It's, you know, sometimes the artists get it pretty bad. And so that, this may be, you know, a guy one time saw a hippopotamus, you know, with not all of it in the water, and he just figured the legs look like that, and one time saw a crocodile from a distance, and so it's just a bad picture. Very well may be. It says that it's a picture of pygmies hunting for hippopotamuses and crocodiles. And I'm not at all going to say it's not that. It may be. But if it was a decent artist, it's not. Because that looks like a Dimetrodon. That's what that looks like. Do I know if they were still alive at that time? No, but I know this is what the artist making the mosaic made. Now, let's look at a photograph. There was a Japanese fishing vessel fishing off the coast of New Zealand in the 1970s. And up they came with a carcass, a decaying, rotting carcass. And they took a picture of it, and it stank so bad, they dumped it back into the ocean. Scientists looked at it. American scientists ended up deciding, the Japanese scientists ended up commissioning a stamp, and I've got a picture of it in a book up here, of the plesiosaur, which is the dinosaur that some of the scientists believe that this was. And they commissioned a stamp for it. American scientists ended up saying, it's a basking shark. I don't know what it is, but it's a decaying something. I'm going to show you the photograph. Now, it doesn't look like a shark to me. The ocean is very, very deep. The ocean is very, very big. There's a lot of things down there we have never seen. Adam and I and April went down at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. We went to see the 3D thing on the Galapagos Islands. And one of the most exciting parts was when they sent one of these deep sea diving things down to explore life forms off the coast of the Galapagos, under the ocean. And it was cool. And they went down, and while they filmed and we watched, they caught some animals down there that had never been seen before. And they used these robot arms, and there was this one fish, they used a suction hose thing. It went out there and just, sucked it up, and then other things they picked up, and they put it in containers, and they brought it up. And I don't remember how many, but just in that one thing, they were down there for about an hour or so, and they got at least 2 or 3 animals that had never been seen before. There's a lot of things down in the ocean that we've never seen. Do I know if there's any plesiosaurs still swimming around out there in the ocean? No. But in the 1970s, that was swimming around out in the ocean. And I am no expert on basking sharks. But you know what? That looks to me kind of like a head. That looks to me kind of like a neck. This looks like something in here might be some flippers. This looks like something that we have not seen before. What's the point of all this? Well, in Job's time, I believe there were a lot of animals that are now extinct. There's animals that were not extinct 200 years ago that are extinct now. God mentioned 2 animals to Job that were really impressive. One of them, his tail moved like a cedar. We know that back then, that sometime in the past, there were dinosaurs that could move their tail like a cedar. I believe that's a dinosaur that God's talking to Job about. Well, what about a fire-breathing dragon? Let me finish up with this. If you had never seen a lightning bug, and you read an ancient account of a bug that could make light, what would you think about it? Well, that's silly. How could a bug make light? If you had never heard of an electric eel, and you read some fanciful account of this snaky fish thing that made electricity, what would you think of that? Well, how ridiculous. A fish thing could never make electricity. Let's use the bombardier beetle. The bombardier beetle is a beetle in South America, and it's been studied, and they figured out how it does what it does. What it does, it's called bombardier beetle because when an enemy comes up to it, it shoots hot gases at like 212 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's a little explosion. And it sounds like a little bomb going off. So if here's a bombardier beetle, and you can look it up in an encyclopedia or whatever if you have a good one. Here comes a frog, say, up behind the bombardier beetle. He's got these two little jet tubes going out the back, and he will fire off an explosion at that thing, and it'll send these gases out at 212 degrees and burn the frog, and the frog will go away and eat something, with less defenses. How does he do it? Well, inside the body, he produces chemicals. There's hydroquinone and another one that slips my mind at the moment. And these two chemicals react together. They can react explosively. He also produces an inhibitor in his body that keeps these stable. But when his nervous system detects danger, his body injects an anti-inhibitor that cancels out the effect of the inhibitor, and into the combustion chamber this explodes and shoots these hot gases out the tail. Now, he's still alive. You can read about him in an encyclopedia. A German scientist did the study on him some years ago. God made some animals that can make light. There's creatures down in the ocean that have phosphorus stuff going on. So God's made animals that can make light. God's made animals that can make electricity. God's made animals that can create explosions within their body and send out hot, defensive things towards other animals. We know dinosaurs existed because we've got their bones. What were they like? Well, you'd need more than the bones to know for sure. But if God told Job, I want you to look at this one here. Look at how strong his limbs are. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. People run. It doesn't even do any good to throw a javelin at him. And when out of his mouth comes fire. I believe that out of his mouth came fire. How? The same type of chemical, some type of chemical thing that God made the bug be able to make the light. He made the eel be able to make the electricity. He made the bug be able to make the explosion. Put that on a larger scale and adjust the chemistry or whatever a bit, and I believe God could have done that. And you know what that would explain? Not only would that explain Job, but that would explain why people over here in China came up with a big reptile that breathes fire, and over here on the other side of the world, people in England were talking about big reptiles that breathed fire. That's awfully coincidental to be nothing but a fairy tale, isn't it? For there'd be if one of them had been a mammal and one a reptile, or both reptiles. So I believe that these animals, I don't believe that this animal that breathed fire and raised himself up was a crocodile. I don't believe that the animal that bent his tail like a cedar and was first of the ways of God was a hippopotamus. I believe dinosaurs existed. I believe God created dinosaurs. I believe he created dinosaurs the same week he created man. And so until dinosaurs went extinct, I believe men sometimes saw those dinosaurs. And I believe that Job lived at a time when some of those dinosaurs were still alive. And that God said to Job, take a look at this. I created that. These other things, did they really have flying reptiles in, or was Herodotus misinformed? I don't know. Was Aristotle misinformed? I don't know. Was Strabo misinformed? I don't know. Was this based on something he had seen, or was it just, made up? I don't know. Was this a crocodile, or was it a Dimetrodon? I don't know. Is this a basking shark? I'm not an expert on decaying basking sharks, so I don't know. But I kind of don't think it is. Whatever the case, the coelacanth proves whether dinosaurs went extinct shortly after the lifetime of Job, and none of these are real. The coelacanth proves that just because that scientists tell us, oh, this animal has been extinct for X millions of years, that they haven't checked everywhere. So they don't know. And they didn't live it every time, so they don't know. And when they found them, and they put it on TV and showed the divers down there swimming with them and filming them, it's obvious they were wrong. Might there be some plesiosaurs out in the ocean somewhere? I don't know. I would not say that there are, but I just don't know. I will not say that we know there are not. But in the time of Job, there was something that God called a behemoth that moved its tail like a cedar. And in the time of Job, there was something that had scales, that when it raised itself up, the mighty were afraid, and a javelin didn't do any good, and it did breathe fire out of its mouth. And those animals were impressive. And God wanted Job to know, I made those. It's impressive to read about them. It's impressive to go and see the animals, the skeletons on display of various type of dinosaurs. It's impressive to look at the intricacy in some of the little bitty animals that God made. It's impressive to look and see ants, how they can build a colony and do everything they do. God made some fascinating, extravagant, impressive things that help us see his power. It helped Job see it, and it helps us. Thank you for your attention. If you're subject to the invitation, won't you come as we stand and sing? Wandering from the fold of God, hear you not the invitation, nor to meet thy God. Careless soul, oh, heed the warning, heed the warning. Life will soon be gone, oh yes, your life will soon be gone. Oh, how sad to face the judgment, oh, how sad to face the judgment. Unprepared to meet thy God. Thoughtless are you standing, while the fleeting years go by, and your life is spent in folly. Oh, prepare to meet thy God. Careless soul, oh, heed the warning, heed the warning. Life will soon be gone, oh yes, your life will soon be gone. Oh, how sad to face the judgment, sad to face the judgment, unprepared to meet thy God. Spurn the invitation till the Spirit shall depart. Then you'll see your sad condition, unprepared to meet thy God. Careless soul, oh, heed the warning, heed the warning. For your life will soon be gone, oh yes, your life will soon be gone. Oh, how sad to face the judgment, oh, how sad to face the judgment. Unprepared to meet thy God. I'm going to leave this photograph out up here of this, whatever it was, carcass that they dragged up. And in another lesson sometime soon, we'll be talking about national memories and myths type thing. We're going to be looking at some flood stories, because all around the world you've got flood stories. Some of them kind of similar to the Bible, and some you get your fairy tale parts added on in. But when you have certain things in the past, they get retained in people's knowledge. Thank you.
Let's please be seated. I believe there are some to just take a look.